Zootopia is recognized for multiple reasons. Its characters, the people who enjoy Shakira's muscular dancers, and for having extremely dark themes for a children's movie, especially considering all the dark details from the original script, which I assume you already know. Apart from all this, there was special work done to make the city feel quite realistic. We can see it was created with the sizes, needs, and physiologies of each of the animals, with particular care in the functioning of the different biomes and the city's infrastructure. It's a world created with great attention to detail and care, and precisely because of this, it has many stories hidden beneath the surface, but we can unravel them if we carefully examine this vibrant world, and one of them is the one that gives this video its title. Well, I imagine you must have already noticed, far away from the neon lights, the pretty palettes, or the rodent tunnels, there's a pretty extensive organized crime underworld forming in the city, led by the polar bear Mafia. In Tundra Town, it's run by the character Mr. Big. Based on interviews and even simple visual references we can see during the movies, or the way they talk to each other, we can see that it's an analog to the Russian and Italian Mafia, at the same time with clear references to the Godfather movies, but with an organization that parodies the concept of a Russian Mafia. I mean, this guy's name is Kozlov, it couldn't be more obvious than that. To avoid this video being banned from the face of the earth, we can't really go into detail about the crimes of the Vratva, the Russian Mafia, but we can generally list the ones mentioned by Wikipedia: arms trafficking, money laundering, widespread violence, nuclear material trafficking, and human trafficking, which brings us to Nick. In comparison, and despite having somewhat questionable morals, Nick is presented to us as a small-time criminal with a heart of gold, who maybe was involved in some scams, sure, but nothing completely irredeemable. But that doesn't explain the obvious fact that they both worked together in the past. How could a dangerous thug like Mr. Big trust someone as harmless as Nick? First, we need to understand what crimes are shown in the movie during the famous popsicle montage, which we will compare to real New York laws, since it is the city most similar to Zootopia in our world. When he deceives businesses about the use of goods and sells popsicle sticks as imported wood, he would be committing false advertising, breaking Code 19.20, with a possible penalty of up to 1 year. Additionally, his constant tax evasion would fall under Code 1806 with punishments ranging from 3 to 25 years, depending on the duration of the crime. And of course, we can't forget the biggest evidence of his criminal past, his ease in entering restricted areas, violating Code 140.10 at least twice, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Adding up these few crimes, a law student's analysis estimates that Nick could face around 30 years in prison. Again, this only takes into account certain crimes from the movie and not everything he might have committed off-screen or things we don't know about. This brings us to one of the most interesting facts Zootopia unexpectedly reveals. When Nick and Judy are captured by members of the Mafia and brought before Mr. Big, she mentions several things that give us a pretty interesting picture of Nick. At some point, he actually became a pretty important member of the criminal family, with Big commenting that not only did she invite him to sit at her table, but her grandmother even cooked a delicious dessert for him, showing her appreciation. He was such a beloved member of the family that it really hurt her when he tricked her by giving her a skunk rug to bury her grandmother. Now, it's interesting how this practice of burying someone wrapped in a rug is often used in crime fiction as a method to get rid of bodies without attracting attention. Bodies that have been killed and did not die of, let's say, natural causes. So I wouldn't rule out at all the idea that Mr. Big had her killed, but that's not the point, at least for now. That skunk rug is made from parts of that animal, a conscious being that movies have shown us countless times has the same dreams and hopes as our protagonists. He's a person. Of course, that better explains why Mr. Big feels so insulted, since they basically buried an animal wrapped in human skin, specifically its backside, a rug made from a skunk's butt. So where did that skin come from? Of course, I'm far from the first person to have noticed this, and it's something that has been discussed in multiple ways by... He came across a roadkill animal whose body he ended up using. A theory that would avoid having to label this Disney character as a cold-blooded killer, but unfortunately, it has a lot of logical holes. First, If he magically came across a corpse in an extremely convenient way, that doesn't solve anything at all. He still had to find someone to treat the skin, separate it, and turn it into a rug, like in Red Dead Redemption 2. I don't even need to start typing the phrase into Google to know that it's something incredibly illegal. In the real world, there have even been cases like art exhibitions, which I'm not sure we can show without censoring, but you can imagine that this kind of creation should be way beyond Nick's abilities. I mean, we know that because of his early days as a Boy Scout, he has some basic medical knowledge, but not taxidermy. The other problem is that if he was a respected member of the Mafia, why would he suddenly decide to bite the hand that feeds him? Well, interestingly, this answer isn't found in the sequel or the animated series they released recently, but rather in something mostly forgotten, the promotional books. This promotional book, in particular, seems to include certain details ignored by the movies, focusing on the relationship between Nick and Finnick, where it's revealed to us that, in the beginning, he saw the latter as a threat or competition, someone who, if he could, he would make disappear to take over his market. We have to remember that these are his early years as a con artist, without contacts, without a plan, and without money. So, in this official Disney book, having run out of options, he decides to take the only logical path, betting his last peso on horse races. And this is where Nick tries to scam the wrong person, Mr. Big. That's an aspect I think has mostly been abandoned throughout the sequels, probably to move the franchise away from those darker ideas they played with at the beginning. But we can add the horse racing betting circuit to his power. Horses that, incidentally, drive racing carts. Adorable. Going back to Nick, Mr. Big directly tells him that he'll finish him if he doesn't get his money by 6 p.m. And obviously, Nick doesn't make it. But when it seems like all is lost, he offers the ridiculous promise that, with the help of Finnick, who they were also betting on, they would double the money. Before nightfall, they cut off the water to the desert animals and resold bottles at sky-high prices, which, without a doubt, might be the worst thing these two have done. However, the plan works, and not only did these two start working as a team of con artists, but they also surprised the biggest mobster in the city, with whom they began a very lucrative relationship. Now, it may be that both of them decided to stay as far away as possible from any job that would force them to get their hands dirty. But even so, it's inevitable that during the years they operated with this kind of criminals, they were close to some really dangerous people. Is that where the Fox's less legitimate contacts come from? This is where we come back to the topic of the grandmother, who you might imagine is a sweet or friendly old lady who is outside her grandson's criminal life, but nothing could be further from the truth. While researching, I found that many times these old ladies can be a vital part of any kind of secret organization. Known by titles like La Nonna or Señora, they're often the ones in charge of talking to contacts, or they handle organization and various other logistical roles, all hidden beneath that fragile image. Remembering, for example, the case of Maria Serrano, or the heroine grandma, a woman from a powerful lineage, the mastermind behind multiple organizations and dangerous missions. Or Griselda Blanco Restrepo, a woman who, at almost 70 years old, was still running her Miami cartel with an iron fist until shortly before her death. And even if we go back to Russia, we have the case of Tamara Samsonova, a 72-year-old woman known as Baba Yaga, who was one of the most famous serial killers of recent times. So I'm going to ask you not to underestimate old ladies. Following the idea of the powerful matriarch, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this very woman helped found the organization. At the end of the day, Mr. Big mentions that his daughter used to cook for some of the most dangerous men in his ranks, so at the very least, she knew what her grandson was involved in. Added to the fact that it's literally a parody and homage to Mafia movies, personally, I like to think that she was actually the head of the operation. In classic style for these movies, something was happening behind the scenes, a bloody mix of betrayal and a twisted hunger for power, which could have ended with Nick, who was in charge of getting the rug they would use to wrap up the late Nonna. Now that we know the context and the Mafia connections, we can be sure that yes, Nick knew what he was doing, and even so, he decided to deliver the equivalent of a taxidermied corpse at a wake, which they would use to wrap up the beloved Nonna of a mobster. And we come back again to a simple but not so simple question. Why? From a more sympathetic angle, we know that Nick isn't really a bad person, but rather, his image is a mask he usually puts on to face the life of a criminal. So I think he originally agreed to be part of Mr. Big's group for protection, wealth, or the excellent dental plan. But in the end, he decided to leave his association with the family when things started to get more real. And it's very clear that Nick isn't someone capable of getting so deeply involved with such a dark criminal network, and maybe that was the very reason for this whole mess. You know, getting out of the Mafia isn't that simple, and maybe the only way he found was to hand over a rug like that, so that not only would they kick him out, but they'd also see him as a cold-blooded killer. A criminal so insane and dangerous that they'd leave him alone, even though he probably never killed anyone with his own hands. Or at least, that was the image he wanted to project to the bigger organization, to the thugs and other low-ranking members. With the family itself, Nick had earned respect and favors, along with Mr. Big's good opinion, something that must have also helped so that they only reluctantly exiled him instead of sending someone to kill him right away. That's why he was so terrified when they returned to Tundra Town, because he knew his big scam was about to collapse, his luck was about to run out. The plan was to escape, and if he ever came back there, no good reputation would save him. He's only still alive because of Judy Hopps, but you already know that part of the story. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe for more content like this. Remember not to give a rug made of human butt to the Mafia boss of your city, and see you later. Goodbye.